Maria wiped down another table, her cloth moving in smooth circles across the polished wood. The fancy dining room at Meridian Country Club buzzed with quiet conversations and the soft clink of expensive silverware. She had been doing this job for 3 long years now, and most days felt exactly the same. The people sitting at these tables wore clothes that cost more than she made in 6 months. Their jewelry sparkled under the crystal chandeliers, and they talked about vacations to places she had only seen in magazines. But to them, Maria might as well have been invisible. They looked right through her when she brought their food or refilled their wine glasses. Maria was 28 years old, but sometimes she felt much older. Every morning she woke up at 5:30 to get her 8-year-old daughter Sophia ready for school. Then she would drop Sophia off at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment next door before heading to work. Mrs. Rodriguez was 73 and had become like a grandmother to Sophia. She never asked for much money to watch her, which was good because Maria didn't have much to spare. The country club job paid better than most places in town, but it still wasn't enough. Maria worked the day shift serving lunch, then went home for 2 hours to help Sophia with homework and make her dinner. By 6 o'clock, she was back at the club for the evening events that often lasted until midnight. Some nights, when there were big parties or weddings, she wouldn't get home until 2 in the morning. Tonight was one of those nights. The annual Hartwell Foundation fundraiser was happening, and the ballroom looked like something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of white roses decorated every table, and the guests wore gowns and tuxedos that probably cost more than Maria's car. She moved between the tables carefully, balancing heavy trays and trying not to trip on the marble floors in her worn black shoes. Maria had learned to become invisible at these events. She kept her eyes down, spoke only when spoken to, and tried not to listen to the conversations around her. But sometimes she couldn't help overhearing things that made her heart ache. Tonight she heard a woman complaining that her daughter's piano lessons cost $800 a month, calling it such a waste of money because the girl wasn't naturally talented. $800. That was more than Maria's rent. And here this woman was treating it like pocket change for something she didn't even think was important. Maria's own daughter, Sophia, begged for piano lessons every few months. She would press her little fingers against the keys of an old keyboard they had found at a garage sale, trying to pick out melodies she heard on the radio. The keyboard was missing several keys, and most of the sounds it made were more like electronic beeps than real piano notes. But Sophia didn't care. She would sit there for hours making up songs and asking her mom to listen. "Someday, Mama," Sophia would say, "maybe I can take real lessons like the kids at school." Maria would smile and nod, but inside her heart would break a little more. Those lessons might as well have cost $1 million for all the chance they had of affording them. What Sophia didn't know was that her mother had once been a different person entirely. Before Sophia was born, before everything changed, Maria had been one of the most promising piano students in the state. She had started playing when she was 5 years old, and by high school, her teachers said she was good enough to play professionally. Her father had worked 2 jobs to pay for her lessons, and her mother had driven her to competitions every weekend. When the letter came from Juilliard School of Music in New York, offering her a full scholarship, the whole family had cried tears of joy. Maria was going to study with the best piano teachers in the world. She was going to become a concert pianist, but life has a way of changing your plans when you least expect it. 2 weeks before Maria was supposed to leave for New York, her father had a massive heart attack while working his night shift at the factory. He was only 47 years old. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. With her father gone, Maria's mother fell apart completely. She couldn't work, couldn't even get out of bed most days. Maria had to choose between her dreams and her family. There really wasn't a choice at all. She turned down the scholarship and got a job at a local restaurant to pay the bills. A year later, she met Sophia's father at that restaurant. He was charming and handsome, and he promised her that everything would be okay. He said they would save money together and maybe she could still pursue music someday. For a while, Maria believed him, but when Sophia was born, he disappeared completely, leaving behind only a note saying he wasn't ready to be a father. So here Maria was, 10 years after giving up her dreams, serving dinner to people who had everything she had once hoped for. The hardest part wasn't the work itself or even the long hours. It was walking past the beautiful grand piano in the club's ballroom every single day. The piano was a Steinway, one of the most expensive brands in the world. It sat in the corner of the ballroom like a sleeping giant, covered with a white cloth, except during special events. Maria had looked up the price online once. It cost more than she would make in 5 years. Sometimes when the club was closed and she was finishing her cleaning duties, Maria would walk over to the piano and lift the cover just to see the keys. They were perfect, bright white and deep black, arranged in the pattern that had once been as familiar to her as breathing. She would run her fingers along them without pressing down, remembering what it felt like to make music. One afternoon, about 6 months ago, she had been alone in the ballroom when she couldn't resist anymore. She sat down at the bench and played just one song, Chopin's Minute Waltz, one of the first pieces she had ever learned. Her fingers remembered every note, every rhythm, even after all these years without practice. That was beautiful. A voice had said behind her, making her jump up from the bench like she had been caught stealing. It was Mr. Peterson, the security guard. He was in his 60s with kind eyes and gray hair, and Maria was sure he was going to report her to management. "I'm so sorry," she had stammered. "I know I shouldn't have touched it. Please don't tell Mrs. Davidson I need this job." But Mr. Peterson had surprised her. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. "Since I was little," Maria admitted. "But not anymore. I mean, I don't really play anymore." "Well, you should," he said simply. "Music like that shouldn't be wasted. Look, the club is empty most afternoons between 2 and 4. If you want to practice sometimes, I won't tell anyone. Just don't let the fancy folks catch you." From that day on, Maria had been coming in early for her evening shifts a few times a week. Mr. Peterson would unlock the ballroom and let her play for an hour or two. It was the best part of her week, the only time she felt like herself instead of just someone serving food and cleaning tables. She played everything she could remember from her years of study: Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin. She also taught herself newer pieces by watching YouTube videos on her phone, learning songs by contemporary composers who wrote beautiful, emotional music that made her cry sometimes. But she never told anyone about these secret piano sessions, not even Sophia. What would be the point? It would only make Sophia ask more questions about why they couldn't afford lessons, and Maria couldn't bear to explain how close they had once been to a completely different life. Tonight, as Maria served, "Dessert to table 15? She glanced over at the piano. Tomorrow was Sunday, her day off, and she was planning to bring Sophia to the park and maybe the library. Simple pleasures, but they made Sophia happy, and that was all that mattered to Maria now. She was clearing away the last of the dinner plates when she heard Mrs. Hartwell's voice getting louder near the front of the ballroom. Mrs. Hartwell was the president of the foundation and the host of tonight's event. She was a tall woman with perfectly styled gray hair and a dress that probably cost more than Maria's car. Usually Mrs. Hartwell was calm and composed, but tonight she sounded upset. "What do you mean he can't come?" Mrs. Hartwell was saying into her cell phone. "The program says he starts at 9:30. People paid $500 a ticket, partly to hear him play." Maria tried not to listen, but as she worked closer to clear nearby tables, she couldn't help overhearing the conversation. "A car accident? Is he all right?" Mrs. Hartwell paused, listening. "I see. Yes, of course his health is more important, but what are we supposed to do now? We have 300 people here expecting to hear Jonathan Clark perform." Jonathan Clark. Maria knew that name. He was one of the most famous classical pianists in the country, someone she had admired since her student days. He had been scheduled to perform tonight as the main entertainment for the fundraiser. Mrs. Hartwell hung up the phone and immediately started dialing another number. "Hello, this is Catherine Hartwell. I have an emergency." Maria watched as Mrs. Hartwell tried call after call, looking for a replacement performer. But it was Saturday night, and apparently everyone was either already booked or too far away to help. As Mrs. Hartwell's voice got more desperate with each phone call, Maria felt something stirring in her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years. The urge to step forward, to help, to use the talent that had been sleeping inside her for so long. She looked at the piano, then at Mrs. Hartwell, then at all the elegantly dressed people who were starting to. Mrs. Hartwell hung up her phone for what must have been the 10th time in 15 minutes. Maria watched from across the ballroom as the older woman's face grew more and more worried. The foundation president was usually so calm and in control, but tonight she looked like someone watching her worst nightmare come true. "Any luck, Catherine?" asked Dr. Williams, one of the board members who had walked over to check on the situation. His wife stayed close behind him, both of them looking concerned. "Nothing," Mrs. Hartwell replied, her voice tight with stress. "Every pianist I can think of is either performing somewhere else tonight or lives too far away to get here in time. The Hendersons drove down from Chicago specifically to hear Jonathan Clark play. The Morrison family flew in from Dallas. How am I supposed to tell them that the main event is canceled?" Maria felt her heart racing as she listened to the conversation. She set her tray down on a nearby service table and took a deep breath. Her hands were sweating, and she wiped them on her uniform skirt. This was crazy. What was she thinking? These people didn't know her as anything except the woman who brought them food and cleaned up after them. But the longer she watched Mrs. Hartwell struggle to find a solution, the stronger the feeling became. Maria had spent 3 years being invisible in this room, but she had also spent those 3 years walking past one of the most beautiful pianos she had ever seen, and thanks to Mr. Peterson's kindness, she had been playing it regularly for months now. More than that, she had been practicing. Really practicing, not just playing around. She had worked through pieces that were more challenging than anything she had played in high school. Her fingers were strong, her timing was good, and her memory of the classical repertoire was better now than it had been when she was 18. The truth was, Maria knew she could play well enough for this crowd. The question was whether she was brave enough to try. She looked around the ballroom at all the elegantly dressed guests. Some were starting to notice the commotion near the front of the room. A few were checking their watches, wondering why the program was running late. In about 10 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell would have to make an announcement, and Maria could already picture the disappointment on everyone's faces. Then she thought about Sophia, sleeping safely in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. Sophia, who believed her mother could do anything, who drew pictures of Maria playing piano for big audiences even though she had never seen her mom touch a real piano. Sophia, who asked every few months if maybe, someday, they could afford music lessons. What if tonight could change things? What if this was the chance Maria had been waiting for without even knowing it? It was terrifying to think about, but it was also exciting in a way she hadn't felt in years. Maria's mind went back to her teenage years, when performing had been as natural as breathing. She remembered the feeling of walking onto a stage, the nervous excitement that turned into pure joy the moment her fingers touched the keys. She remembered the way audiences would get quiet and really listen when she played. How music could make a room full of strangers feel connected to something beautiful. She missed that feeling more than she had ever admitted to herself. "Excuse me, Mrs. Hartwell?" The words were out of Maria's mouth before she could stop them. She had walked over to the small group without even realizing she was moving. Mrs. Hartwell turned around, and for a moment she looked confused, as if she couldn't quite place Maria outside of her usual role as a server. "Yes, Maria, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am." Maria's voice came out smaller than she had intended, and she cleared her throat to try again. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing about Mr. Clark's accident. I hope he's okay." "He'll be fine, thank you," Mrs. Hartwell said politely, but Maria could tell she was wondering why the waitress was getting involved in her crisis. "I know this probably sounds strange," Maria continued, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "But I might be able to help with your situation, with the music situation." Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" This was it. This was the moment where Maria either found her courage or lost her chance. Completely. She thought about all the afternoons she had spent at that piano, all the hours she had put into keeping her skills sharp even when no one was watching. She thought about the dreams she had put aside, but never really forgotten. "I can play piano," she said, her voice getting stronger. "I know it might sound crazy coming from someone who serves your dinner, but I've been playing since I was a child. I studied classical music for years and I think I could perform for your guests tonight if you need me to." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Maria could see the three adults looking at her with expressions that ranged from surprise to skepticism to what might have been curiosity. She forced herself to keep breathing and not run away from the conversation. "You play classical piano?" Mrs. Hartwell asked slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I was actually accepted to Juilliard when I was 18, but I couldn't go because of family circumstances. I've kept up with my playing, though. I know pieces by Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy. Really, most of the standard classical repertoire." Dr. Williams exchanged a glance with his wife. That's quite impressive, Maria, but performing for a crowd like this is different from playing at home. These people are expecting a professional-level performance." "I understand that, sir. And I know how this must sound. But I've been practicing regularly, and I'm confident I could give your guests a performance they would enjoy. I wouldn't offer if I didn't think I could do it well." Mrs. Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking hard about this unexpected solution to her problem. Maria could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she weighed the risks and benefits. "What kind of pieces would you play?" she asked finally. "Whatever you think would be appropriate. I could do some of the more popular classical pieces that most people would recognize, maybe some Chopin nocturnes, some Bach, perhaps some Debussy. I could also play some contemporary classical pieces that are beautiful, but not too modern for a general audience." "How long could you play for?" "As long as you need. Mr. Clark was scheduled for about 40 minutes, right? I could easily fill that time." Mrs. Hartwell looked at the piano, then back at Maria. "You've really been practicing? Recently, I mean." Maria felt herself blush slightly. "Actually, yes. Mr. Peterson has been kind enough to let me use the piano here at the club sometimes during the quiet hours. I hope that's okay. He said it would be all right as long as I didn't disturb anything." A small smile appeared on Mrs. Hartwell's face. "Harold Peterson has been letting you practice on our Steinway?" "Yes, ma'am. Just a few times a week when the ballroom isn't being used. I'm always very careful with it." "And you feel confident you could perform at a professional level?" This was the moment of truth. Maria took a deep breath and looked Mrs. Hartwell directly in the eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I do." The foundation president looked around the ballroom, where more and more guests were starting to notice that something was happening. Time was running out, and she clearly needed to make a decision soon. "The thing is, Maria," she said carefully, "these guests paid a lot of money tonight partly to hear a world-renowned pianist. If we announce that our waitress will be performing instead, well, I'm not sure how they'll react." "I understand," Maria said, "and I know it's a risk for you, but maybe you could just introduce me as a local pianist without mentioning my job here. Most of the guests probably wouldn't recognize me anyway, especially if I'm at the piano instead of serving tables." Dr. Williams's wife, who had been quiet during the conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, Catherine, I think we should let her try. What's the worst that could happen? Even if she's not perfect, it's better than having no music at all. And you never know, she might surprise us." Mrs. Hartwell looked at her watch. It was already 9:20 and the program had promised music at 9:30. In the background, Maria could hear the conversations in the ballroom getting louder as people began to wonder what was causing the delay. "All right," Mrs. Hartwell said finally. "All right, Maria. I don't know if this is the bravest decision I've ever made or the craziest, but I'm going to let you try. Can you be ready to start in 10 minutes? Maria felt a rush of excitement and terror that almost made her knees weak. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I'll introduce you simply as Maria Santos, a local pianist. I won't mention your other job here. And Maria?" Mrs. Hartwell's voice was serious now. "I'm trusting you with a lot tonight. These people have donated a tremendous amount of money to our cause, and they're expecting a quality evening. Please, don't make me regret this decision." "You won't regret it," Maria said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I promise you won't regret it." As Mrs. Hartwell walked away to prepare her introduction, Maria headed toward the back of the ballroom to get ready. Her hands were shaking, but it was the good kind of shaking, the kind that came from excitement and anticipation rather than fear. She untied her server's apron and folded it carefully, leaving it on a chair in the service area. She smoothed down her simple black dress and checked her appearance in the reflection of a serving tray. It wasn't a concert gown, but it would have to do. Mrs. Hartwell stepped up to the small portable microphone that had been set up near the piano. The ballroom was buzzing with conversation, and Maria could see that some guests were starting to look at their watches and check their phones. Everyone had been expecting the music to start 10 minutes ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Hartwell began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "If I could have your attention, please." The conversations gradually died down as 300 well-dressed guests turned their attention to the front of the room. Maria stood off to the side, her heart beating so fast she worried it might be visible through her dress. She could see curious faces throughout the crowd, some looking expectant, others appearing slightly impatient. "I have a brief announcement about tonight's musical program," Mrs. Hartwell continued. "Unfortunately, Jonathan Clark was involved in a minor car accident this evening and will not be able to join us. He's perfectly fine, but his doctors have advised him to rest." A wave of disappointed murmurs swept through the ballroom. Maria saw several guests lean over to whisper to their companions, and she caught fragments of conversations expressing frustration about the change in program. "However," Mrs. Hartwell said, raising her voice slightly to regain attention, "we are very fortunate to have secured a replacement performer for this evening. Please join me in welcoming Maria Santos, a talented local pianist who will be sharing some beautiful classical music with us tonight." The applause that followed was polite but lukewarm. Maria could sense the skepticism in the room as she walked toward the piano. She heard someone near the front whisper, "Who is Maria Santos? I've never heard of her." Another voice responded, "She's probably just some music teacher they found at the last minute." But the comment that made Maria's stomach clench came from a woman in a glittering gold dress seated at table 8. "Well, this is disappointing. We paid $500 to hear a real pianist, not some local nobody." Maria forced herself to keep walking, even though her face was burning with embarrassment. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, and not in a good way. These people had come expecting to hear one of the most famous pianists in the world, and instead, they were getting the woman who had been serving their dinner an hour ago. As she approached the piano bench, Maria could see some guests already reaching for their phones, not to record what they hoped would be a good performance, but to text or check email while they waited for the local pianist to get through whatever amateur performance she was about to give. Maria sat down at the bench and adjusted it slightly, the way she had been taught to do years ago in her lessons. The piano was even more beautiful up close than she had remembered from her secret practice sessions. The keys seemed to glow under the stage lights, and she could see her reflection in the polished black surface of the piano's lid. She closed her eyes for just a moment and tried to block out everything except the music. In her mind, she could hear her old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, saying what she always said before a performance: "Don't play for them, Maria. Play for the music itself. Play because the music deserves to be heard." When Maria opened her eyes, she placed her hands gently on the keys and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. She had chosen this piece carefully. It was beautiful and recognizable, but not so challenging that people would be listening for technical perfection. More importantly, it was a piece that had always spoken to her heart, even as a teenager learning it for the first time. The first few notes floated through the ballroom, soft and pure. Maria felt the familiar sensation of the world disappearing around her as she connected with the music. Her fingers found their way across the keys with the confidence that comes from thousands of hours of practice, even if much of that practice had happened years ago. But something magical was happening. The conversations in the ballroom didn't just quiet down. They stopped completely. The woman who had been complaining about the change in performers looked up from her phone with surprise. The man at table 12, who had been gesturing impatiently just moments before, found himself leaning forward to listen. As the piece developed, Maria's playing revealed layers of emotion that went far beyond simple technical skill. Every note carried the weight of the dreams she had given up, the years of struggle, the love she felt for her daughter, and the hope she hadn't even realized she was still carrying. This wasn't just a pretty melody. It was a story told in music, and everyone in the room could feel it. The serving staff, who had been moving quietly around the edges of the room, stopped what they were doing to listen. Maria's colleagues, who had worked alongside her for 3 years without knowing anything about her musical background, stood frozen in doorways, with tears starting in their eyes. Mr. Peterson, watching from his usual post near the back of the room, felt his chest swell with pride. He had known Maria was talented from that first afternoon when he had caught her playing, but even he hadn't expected this level of artistry. When Claire de Lune came to its gentle conclusion, the silence in the ballroom stretched for several heartbeats. Then, as if the entire room had been holding its breath, applause erupted. But it wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping that had greeted Maria's introduction. This was genuine, enthusiastic appreciation from people who had just experienced something they hadn't expected. But Maria wasn't finished. Without pause, she transitioned into Bach's Italian Concerto, her fingers moving with increasing confidence and precision. This was a more technically demanding piece, and she could sense the audience paying closer attention, listening for her skill level. She didn't disappoint them. Her interpretation of the Bach was clean and energetic, showing off her technical abilities while maintaining the musical sensitivity that had made Claire de Lune so moving. The fast passages sparkled under her fingers, and the slower sections sang with beautiful phrasing. As Maria played, something extraordinary was happening in the ballroom. Phones were being put away instead of taken out. Conversations about business, deals, and social events were forgotten. People who had come to this fundraiser primarily to be seen at an important social event found themselves actually listening to music, many of them for the first time in years. Dr. Williams leaned over to his wife and whispered, "This is incredible. She's really, really good." His wife nodded, her eyes never leaving the piano. Better than good. Listen to her phrasing in this section. That's the kind of musical maturity you usually only hear from concert professionals. At table 6, Mrs. Peterson, no relation to the security guard, was thinking about her own daughter, who had quit piano lessons after 2 years because she didn't want to practice anymore. Listening to Maria play, she wondered if her daughter might have been more motivated if she had ever heard playing like this. The woman in the gold dress who had complained about the change in performers was now watching Maria with fascination. She had season tickets to the symphony and considered herself knowledgeable about classical music. This young woman's playing was easily as good as many of the soloists she had heard at the concert hall downtown. As Maria finished the Bach and moved into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, she began to relax into the performance in a way she hadn't felt in over 10 years. The nervousness was gone, replaced by the pure joy of sharing music with people who were really listening. The Chopin was perhaps the most revealing piece yet, because it required not just technical skill but deep, emotional expression. The melody line needed to sing like a human voice, and the accompanying harmonies had to support it without ever overwhelming it. It was the kind of piece that could expose a pianist's limitations very quickly. But Maria's interpretation was beautiful and mature, full of the kind of life experience that younger pianists often lack. Her phrasing was natural and conversational, as if she were telling the audience a secret through the music. The dynamic contrasts were subtle but effective, drawing listeners into an intimate musical conversation. By now, word was spreading beyond the ballroom. Kitchen staff were gathering in the doorway to listen, and even Mrs. Davidson, the club's general manager, had come upstairs to see what was causing such a commotion. She stood at the back of the room, her mouth slightly open in shock as she watched one of her waitresses give what was clearly a professional-level piano performance. As the Chopin Nocturne came to its quiet conclusion, the applause was even stronger than before. Maria could see faces in the audience that had completely changed from skeptical to impressed to genuinely moved. She was beginning to realize that something special was happening here, something that went beyond just filling time until the evening could end. For her next piece, Maria chose something more contemporary, Ludovico Einaudi's Nuvole Bianche, a piece that bridged the gap between classical and modern music. It was emotional and accessible, the kind of piece that could touch people who didn't usually listen to classical music. As she played the opening notes, Maria found herself thinking about Sophia, probably sleeping peacefully at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. She thought about all the times Sophia had asked about piano lessons, all the times Maria had wished she could give her daughter the musical education she deserved. As Maria continued her impromptu concert, the atmosphere in the ballroom had completely transformed. What had started as a reluctant audience waiting through an unexpected substitution had become a captivated crowd experiencing something truly special. The energy in the room was electric, with people leaning forward in their seats and listening with the kind of attention usually reserved for world-famous performers. Maria decided to take a small risk with her next piece. Instead of sticking to the safe, well-known classical repertoire, she chose Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, Variation 18, a piece that was both beautiful and technically demanding. It was the kind of selection that could make or break a performance, requiring not just perfect technique, but also the emotional depth to bring out its sweeping romantic melody. As she began the famous opening theme, Maria felt completely in her element. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and precision, and she could sense the audience responding to the music's emotional intensity. This was the piece that had made her fall in love with Rachmaninoff during her high school years, and playing it now brought back memories of hours spent practicing in her family's small living room, her father listening proudly from his chair by the window. In the audience, James Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell's son and a talent scout for major performance venues, was completely absorbed in what he was hearing. As someone who had built his career on identifying exceptional musical talent, he knew immediately that this wasn't just a good amateur performance. This was artistry of the highest caliber. James had discovered several musicians who had gone on to have major international careers, and he had that same feeling now that he had experienced when he first heard those artists. There was something about Maria's playing that transcended technical skill, a combination of musical intelligence, emotional honesty, and pure natural talent that couldn't be taught. He pulled out his phone, not to check messages or scroll through social media like many people had been doing earlier, but to record the performance. Whatever happened next, he wanted to have documentation of this extraordinary discovery. The Rachmaninoff built to its climactic moments, and Maria's playing never faltered. The most technically challenging passages flowed under her fingers as if they were simple exercises, while the lyrical sections sang with heartbreaking beauty. When she reached the piece's emotional peak, several people in the audience found themselves wiping away tears. Mrs. Davidson, the club's general manager, was standing at the back of the room in complete shock. She had supervised Maria's work for 3 years, had watched her serve tables and clean dishes and handle difficult customers with quiet professionalism. Never once had Maria mentioned that she was a classically trained pianist, let alone one capable of performing at this level. As the Rachmaninoff came to its powerful conclusion, the applause was thunderous. People weren't just clapping. They were on their feet, giving Maria the kind of standing ovation usually reserved for headlining artists at major concert halls. The sound filled the ballroom and seemed to go on forever. Maria stood and took a small bow, overwhelmed by the response. She could see faces in the audience that had completely transformed over the course of her performance. The skepticism and indifference of 30 minutes ago had been replaced by genuine admiration and amazement. But she wasn't quite ready to stop. The adrenaline of performing, combined with the incredible response from the audience, made her want to share one more piece. She sat back down and spoke into the small microphone that had been placed next to the piano. "Thank you so much for your kind response," she said, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. "I'd like to play one more piece for you tonight. This is Chopin's Heroic Polonaise, and I'm playing it for my daughter Sophia, who believes I can do anything, even when I don't always believe it myself." The mention of her daughter brought a new dimension to the performance. Suddenly, this wasn't just about music. It was about dreams deferred and love that transcends circumstances, and the courage it takes to step into the light after years of staying in the shadows. The Heroic Polonaise was perhaps the most challenging. piece Maria had attempted tonight. It's a work that demands not just technical mastery but also tremendous physical and emotional stamina. The opening theme is bold and triumphant, and it requires a pianist to play with both power and precision. Maria attacked the opening chords with confidence and authority, her whole body engaged in the music. This wasn't the gentle, introspective playing of the earlier pieces. This was music that demanded attention and respect. The bold rhythms and soaring melodies filled every corner of the ballroom. As she played, Maria thought about everything that had led to this moment. The dreams she had given up, the years of struggle, the nights she had fallen asleep exhausted after working 2 shifts, the mornings she had woken up wondering if this was all there would ever be to her life. But she also thought about Sophia's drawings of her mother at a piano, and Mrs. Rodriguez's encouragement, and Mr. Peterson's kindness in letting her practice. The Polonaise built to its climactic sections, where Chopin's writing becomes almost orchestral in its scope and power. Maria's playing never wavered even in the most technically demanding passages. Her years of foundation training were evident in every phrase, but so was the musical maturity that comes from life experience. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the director of the city's premier music conservatory, was sitting at table 19 with her husband. She had attended the fundraiser as a board member of the foundation, never expecting to hear anything more than background music during dinner. But what she was witnessing now was extraordinary. As someone who had taught piano at the highest levels, for over 20 years, Dr. Chen could immediately recognize the quality of Maria's training and the depth of her natural ability. This wasn't someone who had learned to play piano as a hobby. This was someone who had received serious classical training and had maintained her skills through dedicated practice. During a brief pause in the music, Dr. Chen leaned over to her husband and whispered, "I need to talk to this young woman after she finishes. This level of playing is exceptional." The Polonaise was reaching its dramatic conclusion, with Maria's hands flying across the keyboard in the piece's most virtuosic passages. Her technical control was flawless, but more importantly, she was communicating the music's emotional message with complete conviction. This wasn't just a display of skill, it was a statement of artistic purpose. When the final chords rang out, the standing ovation was immediate and sustained. The applause went on for nearly 5 minutes, with people calling out bravo and encore throughout the ballroom. Maria stood at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response and struggling to process what had just happened. Mrs. Hartwell made her way through the crowd to the front of the room, her face showing a mixture of amazement and what might have been regret. When she reached Maria, she took both of her hands in her own. "Maria," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "why didn't you ever tell us you could play like this? In 3 years of working here, you never once mentioned that you were a pianist." Maria's answer was simple but profound. Nobody ever asked. The weight of that statement settled over everyone within earshot. Here was a woman with extraordinary artistic gifts who had been serving their meals and cleaning their tables for 3 years, and not one of them had ever taken the time to learn anything about her beyond her job performance. James Hartwell pushed through the crowd to reach Maria, his business card already in his hand. As a talent scout, he knew that discoveries like this were rare and precious. "Maria," he said, "I'm James Hartwell, Catherine's son. I work in artist management, and I specialize in helping talented musicians build performance careers. What you just did up there was extraordinary. Have you ever considered pursuing professional performance opportunities?" Before Maria could answer, Dr. Chen appeared at her other side. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Chen from the Metropolitan Music Conservatory. I've been listening to your performance tonight, and I would very much like to talk with you about some opportunities we might be able to offer." Maria looked back and forth between the two distinguished professionals, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. An hour ago, she had been clearing dinner plates and worrying about getting home before Mrs. Rodriguez fell asleep. Now she was being approached by people who wanted to help her pursue the dreams she had given up years ago. I'm not sure what to say," Maria stammered. "This is all very overwhelming." "Of course it is," Dr. Chen said kindly. "But please don't let the moment pass. Talent like yours deserves to be nurtured and shared with the world." As word of Maria's performance spread through the ballroom, more and more people approached her. Several guests mentioned that they had recorded parts of her performance on their phones and asked if it would be all right to share the videos with friends who loved classical music. Mrs. Peterson, the woman who had season symphony tickets, waited patiently for a chance to speak with Maria. When she finally got her opportunity, she said, "I just wanted to thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with classical music in the first place. That was one of the most moving performances I've ever heard anywhere." Maria barely slept that night. She kept replaying the events of the evening in her mind, still hardly able to believe what had happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the faces in the audience transforming from skeptical to amazed, could hear the thunderous applause that had gone on for what felt like forever. When she finally got up at dawn, she found Sophia already awake in the kitchen, drawing at the small table where they ate their meals. Mrs. Rodriguez had brought her home around midnight, and Sophia had been full of questions about why her mom was so late and why she seemed so excited and emotional. "Mama, you look different today," Sophia said, looking up from her drawing. "You look happy, like really, really happy." Maria sat down next to her daughter and looked at the drawing Sophia was working on. It was a picture of a woman at a piano with a big audience watching, just like the dozens of similar pictures Sophia had drawn over the years. But this time, something about it felt different, less like a fantasy and more like a memory. "Sophia, what would you say if I told you that Mama played piano for a lot of people last night?" Sophia's eyes got wide. "Really? Like on a real piano? In front of real people?" "Yes, baby. On a beautiful real piano, in front of 300 real people." Sophia dropped her crayon and threw her arms around Maria's neck. "I knew it. I knew. You were the best piano player in the world. Did they love it? Did they clap really loud?" "They did clap really loud," Maria said, hugging her daughter tight. "And some very important people gave me their phone numbers and said they might be able to help Mama play piano for even more people." Over the next few days, Maria's life became a whirlwind of phone calls and meetings. The video recordings that guests had made of her performance had been shared on social media, and they were spreading far beyond the original audience. Her performance of the Rachmaninoff had already been viewed over 50,000 times on various platforms. James Hartwell called her on Monday morning and invited her to lunch to discuss some very exciting possibilities. Dr. Chen from the conservatory called that same afternoon and asked if Maria would be available to audition for a special program they offered to exceptional adult students. But the call that changed everything came on Wednesday. It was from the artistic director of Carnegie Hall in New York, who had seen the videos of Maria's performance and wanted to know if she would be interested in auditioning for their Emerging Artists program. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in America, maybe the world. Maria had dreamed of playing there when she was 18, but that dream had seemed as distant as the moon for the past 10 years. "I'm sorry," Maria said into the phone. "Could you repeat that? I think I misunderstood." "Ms. Santos," the voice on the other end said patiently, "we would like to invite you to audition for our Emerging Artist program. It's a highly competitive program that helps launch the careers of exceptionally talented musicians. Based on what we've seen of your playing, we believe you would be an excellent candidate." Maria sank into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "When would this audition be?" "We could arrange it for next week if you're available. We would, of course, cover all your travel expenses to New York." After she hung up the phone, Maria sat in her tiny kitchen for a long time trying to process what was happening to her life. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford to fix the broken air conditioner in her car. Now, she was being invited to audition at Carnegie Hall. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Maria's audition at Carnegie Hall went better than she could have hoped. She performed the same pieces she had played at the fundraiser, plus a few additional works they requested, and the panel of judges was clearly impressed. 3 days later, she received the call that officially changed her life forever. "Congratulations, Ms. Santos," the artistic director said. "We would like to offer you a place in our Emerging Artists program, with a full scholarship and a stipend to help with living expenses. But the opportunities didn't stop there. Dr. Chen had been working behind the scenes to arrange something even more comprehensive. The conservatory partnered with several local foundations to create a full scholarship package that would allow Maria to complete her formal musical education while also providing support for Sophia's care and education. "We don't want you to choose between your dreams and your family," Dr. Chen explained during one of their meetings. "This scholarship package includes childcare support, housing assistance, and even music lessons for Sophia if she's interested." The Hartwell Foundation, inspired by Maria's story, decided to launch a new initiative called the Hidden Talents Program. It was designed to identify and support talented individuals who had been overlooked because of their economic circumstances or unconventional backgrounds. Mrs. Hartwell asked Maria to be the program's first ambassador and spokesperson. "Your story proves that exceptional talent can be found anywhere," she explained. "We want to make sure that other people don't have to wait 10 years for someone to discover their abilities." The local news picked up Maria's story, and then the Yigai did regional papers and then the national media. The narrative of the waitress who stunned a wealthy audience with her hidden musical talents resonated with people across the country. Maria found herself being interviewed on morning shows and featured in magazines. But the moment that meant the most to her came 6 months later, on a cold December evening at Carnegie Hall. Maria was giving her debut performance as part of the Emerging Artist program, and the auditorium was sold out. In the front row sat Sophia, now 9 years old and taking piano lessons 3 times a week. Next to Sophia was Mrs. Rodriguez, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride. Mr. Peterson was there too, having taken his first vacation day in 5 years to make the trip to New York. Mrs. Hartwell and her son James were in attendance, along with Dr. Chen and many of Maria's new colleagues from the conservatory. But scattered throughout the audience were also many of her former co-workers from the country club, other servers and kitchen staff who had scraped together money for train tickets because they wanted to see their friend perform on one of the world's most famous stages. As Maria walked onto the stage in her first real concert gown, she felt the same nervous excitement she had experienced that night at the fundraiser, but magnified tenfold. This was Carnegie Hall. This was the dream she had given up on, now becoming reality in a way that was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. She had chosen her program carefully. She would play some of the same pieces from that transformative night at the country club, but she was also premiering a new composition, something she had written herself over the past few months. The piece was called The Invisible Song, and it was her musical autobiography. It told the story of dreams deferred but not destroyed, of talent that persists even when no one is watching, of the courage it takes to step into the light after years in the shadows. As Maria began to play, she thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. The scholarship she had turned down, the father who had believed in her dreams, the daughter who had never stopped believing in her mother's abilities, the security guard who had given her a place to practice, and the foundation president who had taken a chance on an unknown waitress. The opening notes of The Invisible Song filled the renowned hall, and Maria felt herself connecting with every person in the audience. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story about second chances and hidden potential and the transformative power of music. As the piece developed, building from quiet introspection to triumphant celebration, Maria realized that this was only the beginning. She had her whole career ahead of her now, and the opportunities seemed endless. There were recording contracts being discussed, concert tours being planned, and collaborations with other artists in the works. But more importantly, she was finally able to give Sophia the life she deserved. They had moved into a small but comfortable apartment near the conservatory, and Sophia was enrolled in a school with an excellent music program. Every day Sophia came home from school and practiced on their new piano. Nothing as grand as the Steinway at the country club, but a real, acoustic piano that filled their home with music. "Mama," Sophia had said the week before, "I'm so proud of you for never giving up on your dreams." "I'm proud of us," Maria had replied, "for never giving up on each other." As The Invisible Song reached its emotional climax, Maria poured everything she had into the music, All her years of struggle, all her love for Sophia, all her gratitude for the second chance she had been given. The notes soared through Carnegie Hall, carrying with them a message of hope that resonated with everyone who heard them. When the final chord faded away, the silence lasted for several heartbeats before the entire audience erupted in the kind of standing ovation that Maria had once only dreamed of receiving. She stood and took her bow, looking out at all the faces in the crowd. Some familiar, some new, all of them moved by what they had just experienced. In that moment, Maria understood something profound about her journey. She hadn't lost 10 years of her life when she gave up her first scholarship. Those years had taught her things about perseverance and sacrifice, and